Okay, hello and welcome everyone to our monthly BCMA webinar. My name is Ryan Hunt and I will be your host for the day. Thank you all for joining me. I know these are exceptional circumstances. You can see by our panelist backgrounds, we're all broadcasting from various points all over the country. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the BCMA offices are located on the traditional territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. I myself am broadcasting from home on the traditional territory of the Wasanik First Nations. We are so grateful to have the opportunity to live and learn in mutual respect and appreciation. We also recognize the traditional lands of many nations across British Columbia and Canada, where the work of today's projects described in the webinar have been carried out. Today's webinar topic is Making Space for Makerspaces, how cultural institutions are embracing the maker movement. I'm sure most people who are attending today's webinar have heard of the terms makerspace, maker movement. Many people are probably active participants in these spaces and movements. But I wanted to pull together some different people with different perspectives from different types of cultural organizations to talk about how everything from libraries to schools to museums to old school buses are embracing the maker movement and encouraging people to think creatively, work collaboratively, and tinker and question and really embrace a very creative and fun movement. So we're joined today by 5 panelists. As I've mentioned, I'm Ryan Hunt. I'm the Executive Director of the BC Museums Association. Before joining the BCMA, I and 2 partners helped to create what was at the time Canada's first mobile makerspace, the Maker Bus, inside of a used school bus. I've had some fun, different maker experiences over the years. Though I haven't been doing as much maker stuff in the past couple of years, I have lots of thoughts and ideas, and I'm really excited to share them. So we will introduce our panelists. We're going in alphabetical order. I realized I just listed people in the wrong alphabetical order. We're going to go in proper alphabetical order now and start with Lisa Connor. Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Connor. I'm the Assistant Director at the Exploration Place. We're a science center and museum located up in Prince George. And for Makerspaces, we just recently opened a temporary exhibit called The Tinkering Space. We did that with our partners and friends over at Two Rivers Art Gallery as well and involved them in that. So that space was open just recently, obviously now closed, but is still up in the museum right now and is going till April 23rd.
Thank you. Katherine.
I am assistant professor at the Université of Montréal currently and director of Laboratory of Public Archaeology. My connection to Makerspaces has been a bit here and there as a result of a lot of institutional nomadism lately. I've worked with University of Victoria, the Royal BC Museum, and now a lot of museums here in Montreal. As a result of that bouncing around, I work in institutional makerspaces at universities and museums, but also whatever I can put in a bag, so kind of Mary Poppins style makerspaces as well, of what you can kind of transport with you. So a lot of setting up of makerspaces in different places and seeing how that goes. A lot of that work is also relating to thinking about kind of collaboration with communities and how we can engage them.
Awesome. Next up, we have Briana.
Hi, my name is Briana Sadler. Or is it switched over? Yeah. So my name is Briana Sadler. I am the MakerLab coordinator at Two Rivers Art Gallery, or Two Rivers Gallery here in Prince George. My experience with Makerspaces is I coordinate one, I run one. We do a lot of STEAM education for adults, for children, for youth. We've been working on our programming for about 7 years, as well as I consider myself a maker. So I dabble in the arts of like laser cutting and 3D printing and combining that with my own particular practice, which is embroidery. So that's kind of my background and experience. And as Lisa mentioned, we collaborate a lot with our partners here, Exploration Place in Prince George.
Thank you. Alan?
Hi, my name is Alan Thomson. I currently support the Makerspaces at the London Public Library. We have several areas. It's called the labs. We have 3D printing available. We have photography and media studio. We have a sound studio as well too. And then ongoing programming with robotics and STEAM and STEM for children. Before that, I've got 30 years experience supporting creative programming with children of all types of programming. And as long back as I can remember, I've been a tinkerer, a maker. When I was young, I used to blow all the fuses in my house, and my parents would be surprised when half the lights in the house would go off because I was dismantling electronic and electrical equipment, plugging it in. But beyond that, photography was the main passion. But right now, currently, my main interest is probably 3D printing. So.
Thank you, Alan. And we have one more special guest I'd like to introduce to folks. She won't be participating very much in today's roundtable discussion, but I would like to welcome Lorenda Calvert to our team. She's the BCMA's new program coordinator and just started last Wednesday. And I'd like to introduce her to the BCMA community and let her know that we are extremely happy to have her part of the team.
Hi, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. Nice to see everyone, and I'm excited to be on this webinar today.
Perfect. Lorenda, I'll probably end your microphone or your camera so you don't have to be on camera the whole time today.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, and before we get started, I would like to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, Lucidia, and thank them again for renewing their 2020 monthly, renewing their sponsorship of our 2020 monthly webinar series. As many of our regular webinar participants are aware, Lucidia is a software solutions company based in Richmond, BC. They develop collections management software systems that are suitable for libraries, archives, and museums, both large and small. Lucidia's motto is refine how knowledge is shared, which is quite fitting for a webinar sponsor. We'd like to thank Lucidia for supporting the BCMA, and we seek to share knowledge through our webinar series. Okay, and if anyone has any troubles today accessing our webinar or technical difficulties, this is an old slide because it says call our office. Unfortunately, we're working remotely. If you could email us at bcma@museums.asn.bc.ca, someone from our team can help you access it. And if you're using the webinar, we encourage you to use the chat feature if you have any questions or comments. Today's webinar is scheduled to have about half an hour of roundtable discussion from our panelists and then about 20 minutes of discussion from our attendees. But please feel free to ask a question at any point in today's webinar using the chat button. All right. So let's start with the first question for today. I'm interested to know what the panelists think. Why cultural organizations are creating makerspaces, why they should be creating makerspaces. What does the makerspace have to offer cultural institutions?
I can speak on our perspective from an art gallery.
Sure.
For us, it is definitely an important aspect of how we do our education programming. When artists create, they make, they do. They are using many different aspects of what a makerspace is. So they are using their science knowledge in terms of combining chemicals, they're using electronics, they're using 3D printing a lot of the time, and there's a lot of ways that artists are now exploring the way that maker culture has become hackers in one sense of the word in order to create their art. And so for us, it's a wonderful teaching tool. So kids can come in, or adults or youth can come in, see the art, and then come upstairs and actually experience how to make that art and how to experiment and problem solve themselves.
Great. And you used a few different words, and maybe we should start by defining some words that we're going to be using a lot. Is
Absolutely.
Like maker, maker space, maker movement, hacker, tinkerer. Do people have feelings about like what the words mean, what the differences are? Are they interchangeable?
Is that directly at me or is everyone?
No, we can go with everyone.
Yeah.
But if you'd like to end, by all
Well,
means.
I think that right now we're seeing maker culture as kind of a newer concept. It's been slightly developed from the 90s into the early 2000s. And so I think right now the definition is definitely a broad definition. And personally, from our perspective, we see it as a multidisciplinary and intergenerational communal learning environment. And so that's kind of our general way that we describe it, because it is a space where everyone can come in, learn from each other, and have that communal aspect of interacting in a multidisciplinary way.
Yeah, I see making and tinkering as being, the same. I just go with tinkering ever since Gaver Tully did a TED talk. That's where I first started using the term tinkering. But the biggest thing that I find when community organizations open up spaces and make them available is it just pulls people together. The one demographic I see a lot over the last year is where you have recent graduates from post-secondary or from high school too, who have all those great facilities in the schools that were available. And then when they graduate, they lose them. So, even if it's software, even if it's hardware, they lose it. So by offering it, it gives them a great chance to have a space to go to, like a public space, a community space.
Yeah, I think that's really great because I feel the same way. Like our tinkering space it's a space for everyone. So we have a space for, a 3-year-old in the corner that they can explore something different, but also something for older people. So in our space, it's definitely for all ages, and it's that hands-on lifelong learning experience that every age group can participate in and be active in. So it's really exciting to see.
Yeah. And sometimes people, I find, have a negative reaction to the term of like hacking or hacker. But I find that in the maker context, it's less about like trying to steal people's credit cards and more about hacking in terms of taking things that were meant for one purpose and then adapting them for your own purpose. So whether that's, I've seen some really fun projects where people take like a Teddy Ruxpin and they'll take the voice box out and insert a different voice box from a different animal. So while it looks like a Teddy Ruxpin, now it's also an MP3 player or something, which is a word that, do people use the word hacking in their makerspaces? I'm interested to know.
We do. We do it quite a bit. We see it with our fiber community. Our fiber artist community really wants to use the technology such as 3D printing and laser cutting in order to make tools. So they're hacking what they do in order to create something new. And that word is definitely interchangeable in everything that we do here. And we don't see it as a negative because it is taking one thing, as you said, and changing it and altering it.
And Katherine, you've had a variety of different maker experiences, both in museums and in higher ed. How are you seeing things being used in a university context?
I think there's a lot of relationships with the use of makerspaces in museums as well as in universities in terms of thinking about the accessibility of technology. Certainly that's a big question for a lot of students, is that they don't necessarily have access to all the tools that they need to make the things that they can make. So I think makerspaces in that sense in universities are really useful for that. The other really useful thing that I'm seeing in university spaces as well is that and it comes back to, I guess, a bit of this idea of hacking and whether hacking is a good thing, a positive term or whatnot. But I really thinking about giving people the skills to be able to change or disrupt things as well. So we talk a lot about critical making and critical thinking as being related in university environments. And I think that makerspaces have that power of bringing people together to not only think about what they're making, but also think about their perspective on the world and how that is actually very much related to making and crafting and hacking in certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great that you bring up the idea of critical thinking, because getting back to the initial question of why cultural organizations are considering creating makerspaces, I think makerspaces are a great location for thinking about things critically. whether that's assessing our relationship with technology and how it serves purposes for us and we adapt our lives to it, or whether it's about thinking about more critically about what we build and how we build it. Alan, libraries to me are a great community space for critical thought. What kind of examples of critical thinking have you seen in your makerspace?
I would say like the critical thinking is more idea sharing and feedback. So, you know, you always have people coming in and out of a public space like a library. And I think that's been my greatest learning experience, as well as a mutual learning experience for people coming. And there's the collaboration, but just, you know, the feedback you get, the evaluations of what you might be working on or seeing somebody else work on. I've seen people work side by side on like sewing machines, 2 different sewing machines, complete strangers. And all of a sudden one's looking over and saying, hey, you know, have you noticed that this is happening? You might have to change your stitch pattern or something. And so I see that happening, a reciprocation of learning and feedback and you know, critical thinking too. So at all ages, young and old too. So.
And Lisa, how have you seen critical thinking unfold in a makerspace environment or a making environment?
For us, it was an interesting process because it's a small space and it was a temporary exhibit. So there was lots of trial and error and critical thinking within our own team as this project evolved. So it was really interesting to have different members of our team come together. So we had our curatorial team, because they really know about exhibit and exhibit setup. And then we had our tech up facilitator, Jacqueline, who really is the one that's working with robotics and STEAM learning. And so bringing everybody together, it was really interesting. So there was that kind of within our organization, that process, also working with our partners over at Two Rivers Art Gallery. So it was a great experience. And after looking back on it, we did, you know, the trial and error and critical thinking ourselves. And then within our own space now, it was open for a short time before COVID-19, but just seeing parents working with children and coming up with different ideas together, and even our staff, so working in that space. I mean, we had these things set up and there was a lot of creative freedom, but just to see them and what they would develop, and then they would pass that and talk to children and parents and people of all ages as they would come into that space and share and collaborate ideas and be like, oh, you were here yesterday and you were building this and look at what we've done today. And so it was really exciting to see that progression of learning and sharing. It was lots of fun.
Excellent. And I think you segue really well into the next question. If you are a cultural institution thinking about building a makerspace, what are some challenges that people have encountered in the creation of the makerspace, whether that's funding, community building, health and safety changes, changing how teams work together? Do people have anything to speak to on those challenges?
I can comment right away, since I kind of led into it, is that one of the things was we have our tech facilitator who was amazing, and she had all these fantastic ideas in her head, and it was making them come to life, which then we were involving our facilities manager to help build these ideas. So the communication between them was really critical, and then with our curatorial team as well. We had two departments that worked together really well and very closely. And then I brought in our tech up facilitator, and she actually described it the best. Our facilities team and our curatorial team, they know how each other works and they function very well. And then, as she said, I was the squiggle that came in and said, let's do this. So it was definitely bringing everybody together to try and get our ideas to be cohesive so that we could present it to the public. And even from the health and safety standpoint, we would build things, but we're testing them as before we're opening, and there were some changes that had to be made just to make sure that visitors of all ages were safe in that space. So definitely, I would say the first 2 weeks of that exhibit being open, we were thinking, identifying things as we would go, as safe and like health and safety, and just coming up with solutions together. So it was a really interesting process for our institution.
I think like some of the challenges I've seen, especially if us being there right from the get-go with seeing a space get up and going, is just maximizing the space that you have, and then how you're going to use that space. and it's always fluid. You may have an idea, get it all set up, and then when people start coming in and using it, you've got to adapt and change it extremely quickly. What I do on a constant basis, whenever I travel, no matter whether I go to a small town or a big city, is I always, seek out all the maker spaces that are available. And if I'm on a holiday or just on a Saturday, I've got nothing to do, I just drive and check out different locations. And it's interesting to see how different locations have, overcome obstacles. I'll give an example. Currently where I am now with the London Public Library, there is no laser cutter. But when I go to places that have laser cutters, it's always, the exhaust, getting the fumes outside safely. I've seen setups that cost as much as the laser cutters just for the exhaust part of it, if not more. And I saw one that was just like a dryer vent tube that went to a window that was just right beside it with a little hole cut in the corner of the glass. That's the way they vent it out. So you have to look at, you may have an idea, but you have to look at adapting, to when people start using it and figuring out the best way to proceed from there.
I could speak a bit on the whole setup with regards to laser cutting and having a woodworking space in an actual operating facility where we have things that are valuable in terms of art and we don't want to destroy those pieces. So we have actually invented a way to redirect our exhaust into a filter system. So our filter system is almost as expensive as our laser cutter. Like the whole thing itself is quite expensive, and the maintenance cost is quite expensive. And that's one thing I think people maybe not realize when they're first getting into this, is that there is a maintenance cost to this. We've been now operating for 7 years, and this is something that we are looking into starting to implement more and more into our budgets on a yearly basis, the maintenance of the machines that we have. So for example, we've now gone through 3 3D printers since we opened.
Cool.
So it's just aspects like that I think that it gets exciting, like, oh, we're going to get this, but the long-term parts of it are, how are you going to exhaust? How are you going to disrupt the building that you have? What are your costs associated with maintenance? What are your costs associated with storage? Do you have storage? There's a lot of other aspects here. I mean, as people probably can see behind me, part of our MakerLab storage is behind me and in my office. So things like that as well.
So what was breaking the 3D printers?
Use, just general use. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think these are some great points that not only is wear and tear a big challenge when you're building a makerspace, but also health and safety. As mentioned, laser cutters off gas. There's some research suggesting that 3D printers off gas as well. Luckily, in my maker experience, the worst injury I ever saw was somebody getting a robot stuck in their hair. But they are highly dangerous environments, especially if you're doing woodworking, metalworking. So how as cultural organizations, which typically are very safety concerned, what are some steps that you take to address safety in those spaces?
For us particularly, we do require everyone to sign a waiver and have full knowledge of what area that they're walking into. We also require safety courses of all our machines. Even operating some of our larger machines, we require that you actually take a course and learn how to use it prior to actually using the piece. We also require membership. Sorry, my coworker's phone is ringing. But yeah, so we just try to put those kind of safety precautions. I mean, but even with myself, who now uses it on a regular basis, I've had fires in the laser cutter. So things happen, and then you just work through it and make sure that you have the proper precautions around the area that you need to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the intro courses.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the intro courses are a great idea. They're very effective. Mm-hmm. And I suggest having it mandatory that, people have an overview and plus the waiver as well before using your equipment. Working in places where that hasn't been the case, you have various skills and abilities coming in. So that may be wear and tear in your equipment. Somebody, you know, who's not familiar with how to use a piece of equipment, doesn't use it right, it breaks. The expression I love to use is I want to put up a sign that says, as tight as necessary, not as tight as possible. You know, some people will over tighten things and then just break pieces, and it could be a $10 screw, but the part that it's attaching to might be a $50 or, you know, $100 piece of equipment that's damaged because of one $10 screw not working or something. So just some of the examples.
I was just going to add, so for us opening a temporary exhibit, what was important for us is to look at having a dedicated staff, because we are all ages. We have a lot of our demographic is families coming in with young children. So we had to basically look for funding, or how are we going to budget in a full-time staff member 7 days a week to be in that space and facilitate those activities. To kick it off, we did a staff training night where all the staff that were going to be scheduled, there was a dedicated, we did 2 nights of training where it was specific on each different activity station that we had set up. We also provided them with a manual and clear lines of communication. So if an issue was to arise, or if they had a concern, like who were they to go to first? So it was just setting up those different steps in place before we opened our temporary exhibit too, which was, it was a great process to go through.
Yeah, we also have, oh, sorry, Ryan.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I just was going to mention with what Lisa said, we also have that person you need to contact if something were to happen, and direct ways that you, like, I am there every single MakerLab night, but if it were the case that I wasn't, there is a roll call, basically.
All right, so I think we're starting to talk about some of the challenges involved. So I think this segues well into our third discussion question is, say I'm a museum or an art gallery, or even a school or library, and we want to make a makerspace. We want to get started. Where would be a good place to start? Be it, you know, what kind of tools, what kind of activities, where do you find information, where do you find funding? What are some experiences that people have about and advice for starting a makerspace?
Honestly, I went online.
Yeah.
I searched, because Makerspaces was new to me. So, I mean, we reached out to our friends at Two Rivers Art Gallery, and I also just went to go online to look at the day-to-day stuff and just explore what other spaces were doing.
Yeah. I'd also look at what you're currently doing in terms of your education already, because I think there's a lot of things that us as cultural organizations are already doing, but we may not categorize it as maker or as STEAM. And for those who don't know what STEAM is, that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So it's a horizontal learning pattern. But I would also just look at what you're already doing, because it is often that way. For us, we did contact people, our government for grants, BC Arts Council. For one thing that's quite unusual for us is we have NSERC funding. So NSERC for an art gallery is usually unheard of, but it's because we are combining that aspect of STEAM or STEM and art together, that it's quite an unusual, novel idea.
And for folks that aren't as familiar with NSERC, Briana, would you mind just giving a brief overview of what that is? Oh,
yeah, of course. It's a National Engineering Research and Science. So I always forget that acronym. It's basically a science and engineering research granting funding source. So usually people who are working in the science and engineering fields, such as science museums, or people who are going on to doing research for that particular field, receive grants in order to do that work. So as an art gallery, we often work with the BC Arts Council, BC Museums Association, places such like that fund arts funding. But because we have a makerspace and arts, we were able to tap into NSERC.
And Katherine, I've seen you work on some projects with students and museums to do kind of like pop-up maker days. With that project in particular, you were working with 2 groups of people who, neither of which, the students nor the museum, were super familiar with makerspaces. How was it getting that kind of project off the ground?
Busy. I think in that context, it's a kind of context where you have a lot of positives, where you have a lot of people with diverse knowledge sets that come together in really interesting ways. But then you also have to figure out where everyone stands. So those projects usually involve more than 30 people who are working on it. So communication and things like that were really difficult, or difficult to manage, particularly if people are based in different sites. But also thinking about the fact that it was a pop-up environment for community members to use, also thinking about how you actually engage communities and the public from the get-go into the design of these events and what they want from them. But I think the big elements we're thinking through the communication side of things, but also, and I think this leads a bit off of the health and safety side of things, but sometimes gets forgotten about, is also thinking through how you work into kind of inclusion and belonging and making sure that these are safe spaces for a lot of different people to come together. So thinking about whether you need to implement a code of conduct from the beginning and what that would look like, and how you frame that, and ensure that even just the language that you're using in the space is something that's creates a sense of belonging, because ultimately that's what these spaces are for. It's not necessarily the technology and things like that, it's for the coming together part. So how do you actually create a framework that's conducive to including people and making them feel safe in that space, not just kind of physically safe, they're not going to cut off a limb, but actually safe to be themselves as well.
That's such a good point, because from the community building perspective, I found that, you know, historically makerspaces have felt like very like male environments, very like man cavey, a lot of them. But there's so many amazing makerspaces now that are being inclusive spaces, that are bringing in diverse opinions, diverse backgrounds, diverse types of making. How have people on the panel gone about building those diverse, inclusive makerspaces that are really great reflections of their communities?
I could speak on a program that we have here at Two Rivers Gallery. It's MakerLab Youth Immersion. And I think that's been a wonderful example of creating a safe and inclusive space. So MakerLab Youth Immersion is a 10-month program where the youth come between the ages of 15 to 20. They have to apply in order to be a part of this. And they learn things like laser cutting, 3D printing, silver clay, fine art, First Nations design, woodworking, wood turning. So they learn a whole bunch of different things over the 10-month period. And it's a wonderful space for them, because part of our mandate is that half have to self-identify as First Nations. So it's a space where we are creating a welcoming environment. Everyone on the staff knows their name. We often will help them with things outside of what maker culture is. So it's creating a home, a second home for them in a sense. They'll come here not during MakerLab hours, they'll come here during the regular operating hours and chat with us and talk with us, tell us what they're doing. They'll come back after years of not being in the MakerLab Youth Immersion and keep us informed of everything that they're happening. So we're creating some wonderful relationships there. In addition to that, I have MakerLab mentors who are wonderful additions to the environment, who are also there to encourage people into things they may or may not want to do, or no, sorry, shouldn't say it that way, encourage people into things that are different or unusual for them. And so it's a great connection in terms of having that communal aspect and creating that space. So you really want to have your own people there that are welcoming and open.
I would just add. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
I was just saying, I would just add to everything about, you know, just it's always an open space. Like anybody is always welcome to come in anytime, you know, like during operating hours, and use the equipment, and also, you know, connect with the program staff who are supporting it as well too. You know, I've always gone out like a little extra mile when I find that there's somebody quiet on the background of a group coming in, you know, who just you can tell they want to ask questions, they want to get more involved, and I make sure at the end I go up and support that person coming in as well too. if you have various groups too, you maybe have a First Nations group come in on their own, like set it up on an evening program. We've had special needs groups of children come through as well too. So kind of a more secure, supportive group. You know, also they can come in with other groups as well too. But just creating like a more focused group has been very helpful as well too. I had that happen about a month ago, and just on the weekend past, before the shutdowns, I had 2 kids who came in from a special needs group with a worker and said, hey, I remember that day that we were out with you a couple of weeks ago and just wanted to come back. So seeing those moments has been really touching and really motivational for myself.
Awesome. And can other people see the slideshow that I'm showing, or is it just me that's looking at it? Other people can see it as well? Oh, okay, perfect. Yep. I wasn't sure. So on the screen, I've just put up a photo that Briana from Two Rivers sent me. Can you talk about a bit about this event and how it works with your community?
Of course. I actually didn't think I'd be talking about this event, but I would love to talk about it. So this is our Trash and Show. We had our first inaugural Trash and Show last year, and it was an opportunity for artists within our community to create these beautiful pieces of wearable art out of recyclable material. So the one that you're actually seeing on the screen right now is It's Not My Party, or It's After My Party. It's what the title's called. And they used old birthday wrapping in order to create that outfit. This way connected with our community in a very inventive and out of the box thinking. It was the first for Prince George. I know that there have been a lot of places throughout Canada as well as BC that have actually created their own trash and shows. For those of you who don't know what a trash and show, it's basically a combination of trash and fashion. So trashin', and it was a way for them to work with materials that they were not familiar with, or that may have not wanted to work with before, and then saw something and went, oh, what can I make with this? So it was our part to kind of encourage the thoughts around sustainability, around our overproduction of trash and recyclable materials, and how can we repurpose those so that we could create something new. A lot of people ended up coming to MakerLab in order to use the space to create their pieces too, which was wonderful to see. So we had people using tools that they may not have used before in order to make pieces.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And what other, for people on the panels, what other kinds of events have they held in their makerspace or utilizing their makerspace to encourage building those new community connections?
Unfortunately for us, it was opening the tinkering space. We had a few school groups come through, and then unfortunately we're closed right now.
Yeah, I mean that's something we can talk about in our questions period about. Well, we talk about it right now. So yeah, that's the thing about a makerspace is it's a space, and it typically has people in it, and those two things are not really encouraged right now for good reason. So if you are a maker, into the maker movement, into tinkering, what are some ways you could encourage people to make by themselves or in small groups in the seclusion of their homes?
Actually, can I comment on that? Because I have a 7-year-old, and I am thankful for all of the toilet paper rolls and all of, like, we just have like wood in the shop, and he has been building and creating himself this since spring break has started, and it's been phenomenal. I think my extension to that will be to start to go online. So this is a parent perspective, but will be to go online and look for different STEAM activities for him. But just engaging him at home. We do have some neighborhood kids that come over occasionally, and so we're just exploring these different things together while washing our hands frequently.
So one of the...
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
Oh, sorry, I always jump in at the beginning. So one of the things, since Christmas, the Christmas break, I have spent about 50 to 70 hours making something that I'm currently sitting on right now. And I shared it on Facebook, on social media, and everybody lit up. And I was originally making this cardboard tube chair for, I was going to take it and have it at the library on display. But since I spend 50 to 70 hours of my own time on weekends and evening, I just find it very hard to release. It's going to be probably at home mainly now, but just putting it up, and people started asking questions. How did you make it? Where did you get the cardboard rolls and everything? Now you can't see it very well, but I'll just move and kind of with the camera there, you can see it. And it was just some very sturdy cardboard tubes, but gluing 2 tubes together took like an hour of drying time, clamping and binding them together. And I thought it was going to be a weekend project, and it's turned into like I said, almost 70 hours of time spent on it. So, but yeah, just whatever you do, like at home or at work, just share it online and people like it. The minute you make something, no matter how big or small, people just light up and your likes go up and the interactions, the comments are amazing.
In addition to that, I would agree with that, Alan. And I know that we are looking into online programming to see if there's an option for us. We're still yet to discuss it fully, but that is something that we are personally looking into and how that might develop. But there is a wonderful website called make.com, and they have some great activities for kids of all ages, for adults, for whoever you want to do. It's often a place where I go for a lot of my ideas. And then another thing that we are currently encouraging our Prince George community to do is, if you're stuck at home, why don't make a trash and show outfit for our next trash and show in September? So that's something else that we're really trying to encourage.
Yeah, Briana, that's great. Make.com is fantastic. I also like Instructables.com as well too. Yeah, that's amazing.
Instructables is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think what we might do is I might poll all of the panelists for their favorite web resources after this and send out an email to everyone who's attending today's webinar with some links for people that want to find more information. Katherine, since you were working with a lot of university students, did they find any great online resources during your classes with them?
I think I actually have, I found a lot of resources, and I had some mentors come into my classes that found a lot of resources, and then they explored them further and found kind of sublinks to share back at me. But I think a lot of my making has been on the side of working with things like Makey and Raspberry Pis and the kind of gadgety type of things. So looking at a lot of what's available through, and of course now all my mind will go blank, but I'll share the links with you later. But a lot of these companies that are supplying these things have great resources and tutorials of how to use them and different ideas of using them, with full videos that show every step of the way. So that's where I go to a lot for them. And just to add on to this section of kind of fine-tuning things, now that our relationship to one another has shifted quite dramatically in the last week, I've now shifted to teaching all online. So looking at how you maintain also the connection to other people, which is so valuable in Makerspaces, even though we can't actually be connected. So thinking about how I can get my students to make things at home with whatever they have in their often dorm rooms and things like that, but also thinking about how we can still be together in a way while we do that process is the current challenge, but I'm hoping to be able to balance the two.
And Katherine, I know this because I know you and I follow you on Instagram. You are a phenomenal baker. Do you think that to be a maker, you have to do tech stuff, or is art making, is woodworking making, is, cooking making? I just got a comment from my spouse who's watching the webinar from the other side of the computer. Like, what does it mean? Like, can anything be making?
In my definition, yes. So I have a project currently sort of under wraps, but in development, that is all cooking relating to archaeology. So I'm excited about that. But I think that anything where you're really using your hands and doing something creatively and producing something really transforms your relationship to it and your perspective about it. So I think that we can expand the definition of making to a lot of things that are just that kind of engagement of doing something with our hands and creating something that exists in the world that's our own and that we've created ourselves. I think that's very transformative.
Okay, well, so this is the amount of time that I had allotted for roundtable discussion, but we now have another 15 or so minutes to have questions from our participants, from our audience. So using the chat feature in Zoom, if any folks have any questions, we'd love to welcome them. I will figure out how to see them from my end, which I can't currently. But if folks have questions, now would be a great time. Enter it in the chat. Here we go. Why doesn't the chat open up for me? And while we're waiting for some questions, I wondered if people had a favorite go-to maker project. My personal one, and I know Alan loves this as well, I love making bubbles. I've just put up a bubble picture onto it.
Yeah.
I will use any excuse to make bubbles. What are some other fun go-to maker projects that people on the panel like?
My one, introduced by yourself and the MakerBus crew, is the cardboard resource. So the screws and the tools that go along with that. I just love cardboard. It's freely available. One of the most inexpensive things you can find and start making with. So I would say Make Do, which is an Australian company. They sell the individual screws and tools are available at even Best Buy sells them now. Lee Valley, resource company. So I can't say enough about Make Do.
Oh, here we go. I figured out how to view questions. Haha, success. So we have a question about funding streams other than the BC Arts Council that people can look to fund a makerspace. That would be a question more for the BC panelists. Any thoughts?
It really depends, I think, on where your makerspace is in terms of where you want to actually develop it. I know that a lot of makerspaces, like the people who have come through our MakerLab to actually talk to me about this specifically, are community-driven makerspaces. And in that case, I always encourage them to talk to their local government and see if there's funding streams within their particular city, because often there are ways to create grants or spaces or other things like that. I mean, as I could say, I could predominantly speak from an arts perspective because that's what I am situated in. But I do always encourage people to talk to their local government because they will have options for you.
Some luck we had when we were running the MakerBus. So just for folks that aren't aware, myself, Beth Compton, and Kim Martin, the three of us, created what at the time was Canada's first mobile makerspace in a used school bus. And one of the more successful ways we had of not necessarily finding funding, but finding support was approaching local businesses that had things that we might be able to use in our makerspace. So we were based out of London, Ontario, and 3M has a hub in London. So we approached 3M and they supplied us with things like dust masks, safety goggles, scissors, tape, all of those kinds of things. So if there are local businesses that have things that you would like in your makerspace, usually local businesses are really generous with in-kind support.
I know in southwestern Ontario, Toyota has a couple of factories in this area, and they've been, well, one factory and then car dealerships, both the factory and some of the car dealerships have given significant donations to libraries to set up makerspaces as well too. So.
Yeah, definitely. Look for any kind of business support. I know your local community foundations, the Vancouver Foundation, Victoria Foundation, Columbia Basin Trust could be a possibility for some funding. I think my biggest piece of advice is if you are excited and passionate about your makerspace, talk to as many people as you can and share that passion, because sooner or later someone will be able to connect you with someone who wants to find some funding possibilities for them.
Yeah,
another question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
We've been successful also with Community Foundation and other, like, in terms of like lending programs, like we have Integris up here, so there's also success in terms of finding support with them. But I think you're right, Ryan, talk to people, see passion, see if they have passion for it, and then you'll find support there.
I would just like to add to that too, that it's like it's not funding, but it's support. So it's reaching out to other people within your community that would support your project. So for us, it would be Two Rivers Gallery. It's been a great support. And also we have an organization called the Recycling Environmental Action Plan Society that gave us a bike that you can pedal to generate electricity for the space. So it's definitely reaching out to community partners and seeing how you can support each other as well.
Awesome. Okay, another question from the audience. This person is in Fort Edmonton Park in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Can you comment on the size or amount of participants you typically have in your makerspace? Is it less or more or unlimited?
Who wants to tackle this one first?
We're a science center museum, so we're open to the general public, and we haven't had to limit the number of participants in our gallery because it's been a pretty steady flow. There's never any more. I think the most I went in there was probably 10 people. So it's a pretty, the space itself kind of limits the number of people in there. And then the staff just monitor it as they go. So we don't really have a size limit right now. I also just want to do a shout out. I used to work at Fort Edmonton Park many, many years ago. So it's great to see.
From our perspective, I should tell you how our particular MakerLab operates. So we have open public every Thursday from 5 to 9, and that's an opportunity for anybody to come in because we are operating on our education programs. We unfortunately can't have it open all the time. That being said, we see a variety of levels of people coming in terms of actually how many people we can have in the space. Our building number is 200. However, I would probably limit that. But I mean, we can have anywhere from like 50 all the way down to 5. So it's so varying. The seasons predict it. If it's sunny out, people don't want to come in. If it's too cold, people don't want to drive downtown. So it really, really varies. And I don't think there's any way to calculate when exactly you're going to have a large number.
Yeah, I would say, like, similar dynamics. I've had from 1 to 80 people, for events that show up or for programs. And if you've got small numbers, put the time and effort into the 1 or 2 people. It pays off exponentially down the road. If you have a bigger group, it's fun, it's exciting, but you don't always make the same connections. So it's great that you have a popular activity offered, but you don't get a chance to connect. So, but work with whatever you have. If you have small groups, put the time and effort. If you have big groups, just make sure it's something exciting and dynamic. And, if you planned on 30 people and 50 or 60 show up, you have to adapt to that too.
Yeah, Alan knows what this experience is like, but in London, when we had the Maker Bus, the London Public Library would hold an event as part of their summer reading campaign, and they would bring, I think, 3,000
That's correct, yeah. For the festival.
Ages, what, like 8 to 12-ish?
I would say, yeah, in that range, yeah.
Yeah, for an event inside of a large building, like a large conference center. And the Maker Bus would do maker stations, and there, the library would be there, other not-for-profit groups would be there, and everyone would be doing hands-on events. And they would have everybody sitting, and then they'd say, "Okay, now go make things," and like you would have 3,000 kids suddenly like turn towards you at once and descend upon you, and it was quite an intimidating experience. And we learned a lot about how to try to make rewarding micro experiences where people could make things or interact with something on that kind of short basis where they only have a couple of minutes to do something hands-on. But I think the great thing about Makerspaces and maker activities is they can scale from one person to thousands of people while still having rewarding hands-on experiences.
Yeah, very good point, Ryan.
Okay, we have another question. This person works at Mackin House. Was not sure what your definition of a maker was. Most interested in a wide range of crafting and sharing with others. What they hope to see is the sharing of traditional needlework in their community. Briana, you mentioned your interest in embroidery. Is this something you share in a makerspace?
Absolutely. We actually have a great connection with our Fiber Arts Guild here in Prince George, and we have an artist who comes in every single Thursday, rain or shine, doesn't matter, she's there, and she helps with felting, helps with weaving, has created weaving kits for us and showing us ways that we can improve current weaving kits that you can find on places such as Thingiverse. Has helped me to develop other things, other simple weaving techniques. We have embroidery hoops. We do a whole bunch of different things. For us, Maker is everything. So I think we touched a bit on that. We bring in the elements of tech and science and all these things, but we really do focus on this horizontal learning stream that is found in STEAM learning, the science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and use all aspects of crafting, making, doing in order to operate our makerspace.
Awesome. All right, so we are just nearing the end of our hour. If folks have one more question, now would be the time. So we'll just give one more opportunity for questions, and then we'll thank our panelists very much. So as I mentioned, I'll touch base with our panelists, and we'll pull together some ideas for online resources, and we'll send those out to participants as well. Links to some of the things that we've talked about, ideas for online making and for finding information. Okay, well, it looks like that was our last question. So I would so much like to thank all of our panelists for their time today, for taking time out of what are now very chaotic lives, and for joining us in this online space. It's great to be able to meet you all digitally and not in person. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you
so much for inviting us in.
Perfect. Well, that will do it for March's BCMA monthly webinar. I hope to see everyone in April, on April 8th for our next webinar. We're partnering with BC HERN, the Heritage Emergency Response Network, and they'll be offering an introduction to emergency response and collection salvage. BC HERN's a really amazing organization that helps museums, archives, libraries, cultural institutions prepare and address disasters as they may arise. And I imagine that disasters are high on everyone's mind right now, so I think it'll be a very well-timed webinar. So until then, we will see you all next time. Thank you, everyone.